And welcome to the Module 15 lecture in Surveying 4475, The Business of Land Surveying. So throughout your academic career, you have learned about the technical side of how to survey. And hopefully you've learned something from this class in how to survey boundaries and engage in the practice of land surveying. So in this, we're going to focus on a lot of different aspects that you don't normally consider when you go to work at your place of employment. This is not designed to try to encourage everyone to be your own boss or to go out on your own. I will say that I've known a lot of surveyors like myself who had that desire early and that it's worked out for very well. But it's not for everybody. I'd say that for at least half, if not more, don't work out, and they go back to work somewhere else, or sometimes they change fields altogether, which may be unfortunate. Um, some people have the acumen to understand and manage business. Others don't. It's okay. There used to be a saying that good surveyors were bad business people and bad surveyors were good business people, and unfortunately I've saw a lot of truth in that over the years. But it's not necessarily true, and especially as society has evolved and it's a lot easier to get good business help. It's not something to shy away from. But there are a lot of benefits to being an employee land surveyor as opposed to an owner. Because one of the things that I struggle with is time management, because not only do I have surveying things to do, but then I have clients that want to talk to me. I have meetings to attend. I have business decisions. I have insurance renewals. I have equipment to look at or to purchase or to send off to be repaired. And a lot of this can be delegated, but often when you delegate some of these things, it might not always work out too good. So there's a balance, and let's move forward into the first slide, modes of operation. So regardless of where you're employed or what you do, you're going to more than likely fall into one of these 5 categories. The solo practitioners. I know surveyors who have no employees. They work out of their home with minimal overhead. They are able to set their own schedule. They are able to charge what they want to within their market. More importantly, for many of them, they can choose what they want to do. They may specialize in just staking out houses and doing lot surveys, or only doing topo and utility location. There are those benefits, but then there are also downfalls in that the bandwidth is really limited. The sole practitioner really can't take on a large survey because it would take them forever to do it, and they would be neglecting their regular client base in the meantime. There's also the aspect that if trucks tore up or the surveyor is sick, there's no money coming in. There's no comp time, PTO, or vacation days to be taken. So everything is a give and take, but this is just to illustrate the various aspects out there that come along with the professional practice of surveying. The traditional surveying companies are becoming less common, in my opinion, in my view, than what they were when I started in this business 38 years ago. In those days, most surveying work product was done by traditional surveying companies. And by that I mean there's 1 or 2 surveyors, often just 1, maybe 2 or 3, sometimes 2 brothers, sometimes 2 partners, often just 1 surveyor. And they would run some crews, and they would have draftsmen, and they would have secretaries, and they would have people who computed the raw data or input the raw data before the era of data collectors. And they specialized in surveying. In some areas they did civil design, such as how it came up in the area that I came up in was a lot of surveyors did subdivision plans. We did not design shopping centers and detention ponds and force mains and water distribution tanks, but we would design, and I still do, uh, road alignments, lots, storm drainage structures, simple water and sewer extensions. Um, Traditionally, the surveying companies like that just operated in a 1 or 2 county area where they were familiar with the people at planning and zoning, the clerk of court. In those early days, printed maps is what we went by. There was no internet, so surveyor might typically buy, for example, all the flood maps and a copy of all the tax maps and a printout of the tax digest in 1 or 2 counties. And when a survey came in, we would pull. Back then, it was very customary to include flood data on every survey and to show the flood hazard area. That has changed, but the tax map would be copy made, and the digest will be looked at as far as finding out who the adjacent owners were per parcel number. Kind of the analog or paper mode of doing some remote research before the internet era. In those days, there were very few solo surveyors because the work just required 2 or 3 men to do a simple survey. An instrument man, a rod man, somebody often would just be a cutter or a carrier of equipment or stakes, and sometimes you had a crew chief and note keeper who did computations on the fly aside from running the instrument. So 3 and 4 man survey crews, even with total stations, were not uncommon. So it was kind of impossible to be a solo practitioner until robots and GPS equipment came out. But in those days, I'd say 80 to 90% of the survey work was done by traditional surveying companies, and the other 20% was done by engineering companies. And the engineering companies would typically be those who, just like you might think of today. The best example I can think of is Watson Browning. They've been around since just right after World War II, and they did engineering and aided in developing most of Atlanta during the baby boom. And they had a surveying department, and they did a lot of surveys. And so a lot of the engineering companies have surveying departments to support their own projects. Otherwise they're having to rely on surveyors to come when they say they will, to do what they say they'll do, and they're beyond their control. So it's advantageous for an engineering company to have a surveying department for that reason. And many successful, engineering companies have good surveying departments that bring in their own work that may be totally unconnected from their engineering projects. Some do not offer surveying to the public for the purpose or for the sole purpose of maintaining that availability to take care of the engineering companies, the engineering projects, and their clients, like construction, staking, and so forth. And in the day that we live in, we see more and more large corporations in the surveying and engineering business. There are, no shortage of, big names that have multiple offices, not just in Georgia, but they'll have multiple offices all across the United States. I know one that has offices in West Africa and in Europe even. So those are large international corporations or large national corporations that are typically multidisciplinary. They offer transportation engineering, hydrologic engineering, flood engineering, structural engineering. They want to be the one-all do-all. They have utility services. Some even have right-of-way acquisition services. Many will have architecture and landscape architecture and be, the one-stop shop. And part of that includes surveying, and that's why they're there. But there are other companies that do not diversify so much and that are just strictly surveying, like SAM Inc., SAM for surveying and mapping, and that's, to my knowledge, that's all they do. So, not to be confused with the national companies that are like national brokerages that operate, on a larger scale which is a different topic that can be taken up at a different day. And then lastly, there are government agencies. Georgia DOT comes to mind. U.S. Forest Service comes to mind. There are a lot of government agencies. A friend of mine works for the U.S. Park Service and is a land surveyor, and he marks and maintains boundaries of national park lands, and often gets involved when there are needs to be a change in the property line, or the city needs to install a lift station on national park property, and he gets involved with locating that and those sort of things. Obviously, DOT, they're involved in surveying right-of-ways and laying out highways. Bureau of Land Management, they are probably the largest single agency that hires lots of surveyors. And for you students, you might do well to look at some of the help wanted postings while you're young, and might want to travel out west and work in the Rocky Mountains as a land surveyor, as a federal employee, at least for a few years. I guess that would be your choice. But there are a lot of opportunities in state and federal governments. And a lot of, even in Georgia, large metropolitan counties, a lot of those have surveyors, either working in a surveying capacity, or I know some that work in planning and zoning just because they understand the work product better, and that's a job that they found is a nice fit for them. And that's obviously advantageous to them to have actual surveyors who can talk to other surveyors, because sometimes us surveyors, we get frustrated when non-surveyors try to tell us how to do our job, or tell us that there's something wrong with our plats. So it comes across better from a surveyor, and they do a better job too because they understand these things better. Now, besides a government agency, if you're working in the private sector, you're going to find yourself probably in one of these 6 categories. The sole proprietorship, which we talked about, and that's working as an individual. Some people just say John Doe, PLS, and that's it. If you go with your individual name legally, you can do that in Georgia. You're not required to have a certificate of authorization if you're just John Doe PLS. If you're John Doe Surveying, though, you are emulating a business entity, partnership, or other entity, and a certificate of authorization is required for that. But a sole proprietorship is definitely an option. Probably the most common business entity used today for small business is the limited liability company, or LLC, which is very similar to a corporation. Instead of stockholders, you have basically shareholders or owners of different percentages, and members and managers. You might have authorized agents, but it's a very flexible vehicle. And all these things, all these legal entities, are either for you to kind of understand the firm you're working for, or to help you understand what you might want to look into if you go into your own business. But it's important to understand some of these things. And I think a course in professional practice of land surveying would be incomplete without a discussion like this. Third is a sub-S corporation, which is a corporation that's incorporated with the Secretary of State of the state that the business is located in, just like an LLC. And it's a simpler version of a corporation. It's not really very different, in my opinion, from an LLC. And it gets its name because it's incorporated under Subchapter S of the IRS tax laws. Which brings us to the fourth entity, a C Corp, or a Chapter C corporation. And these are the more traditional corporations. Napa Auto Parts, or Amazon, probably. They're all probably C corporations. Sub-S corporations are limited in how many stockholders they can have, and there are other limitations that make them well suited for small businesses, but not very suited for larger corporations. So C corporations are usually publicly traded. Most all the corporations on the stock exchange are C corps, and I'd say a lot of the larger companies are C corps, even if they're not publicly traded. Another variation of that used to be a lot more common than it is now is a professional corporation, or a PC. It's still either a sub S or a C. They're most usually a sub S because they're usually small businesses, and they are advantageous in that, at least under some legal premises, it's harder to sue a professional corporation because they're set to a little bit higher level. The law requires that all of the stockholders be licensed professionals. So unlike a lot of these other corporations that may be owned by investors or stockholders or somebody's wife or whatnot, a professional corporation must be owned by the licensed professionals, which is intended to imply that they take better care of the business than if it was just an investment, just a cash cow. They are looking at the operation of the business as a professional. So whereas an investor might say, let's don't go back out there, let's just draw the plat and send them a bill. A licensed professional is presumably more prone to say, we need to make sure that we didn't overlook something. Let's send a crew back out there to look one more time before we finish the plat. And there are others. There are LLLPs, LLIMs. There are all kinds of different letters and alphabet soups, limited liability corporations, limited liability partnerships. There are limited liability law firms, and there are all kinds of other entities that fall into a much smaller section of what's out there. And then there are also there are DBAs, doing business as. So the sole proprietorship might be an entity that is a DBA. It might be, John Doe PLS doing business as John Doe Surveying or Doe Surveying Consultants, etc. There are also some nuances that you might run into, like a company that I worked for initially, instead of saying Inc. or LLC, it said Limited, LTD. You would think that might be a form of a LLC or some other limited liability partnership, but it's actually a term that's associated with sub-S corporations. You wouldn't know that, but that just illustrates that there are a lot of others. The top 5 are the most common, but they are by far not the only entities. And in the world of doing business, especially in the United States, besides having your corporation, your LLC, your partnership, whatever set up as a business entity with Secretary of State, the Professional Licensing Board in most states, Tennessee does not. The other 4 that we practice in that surround Georgia and include Georgia are requiring a firm license. Most call this a Certificate of Authorization, or COA. In other words, it's an authorization for that firm to conduct that particular business in that state. And it's designed to keep one registrant, one licensed surveyor from opening multiple offices, which would be deemed to be inadequate supervision because you can't be in 2 places at one time. And if you're spreading your time equally, at most you're there half the time. With 2 offices, a third of the time with 3. So primary thing is to try to maintain that each surveyor is adequately supervising each office that's in operations. And there's the local business license. Now, there was a day to where if you went to survey the next county over and you didn't have a business license in their county, when you went to record a plat in their county, they would hold it and not review it or accept it until you got a business license. Now, since then, there's been a change in the state law that says as long as you have a business license in your jurisdiction, like I'm in the city limits here, I have a city business license. If I worked out of my home or out of an office out in the unincorporated part of the county, then I would need a county business license. But the law in Georgia is that if you have a business license in your locality and you have the statewide license, the certificate of authorization, then you don't need individual or unique business licenses in every jurisdiction that you go to survey in, which is a big plus. And that's again another throwback back to the day when surveyors didn't work but in 1 or 2 counties. It was not a big deal. Might even say that it was designed or helped to keep people home and out of other people's territory. Surveyors used to be very territorial. Another thing that you have to think about, even if you're an employee, you think about health insurance and life insurance. That's very personal. That's a whole different conversation. But beyond health and life insurance, businesses need insurance themselves. And there are four primary types of business insurance. There's workers' compensation insurance, which in Georgia, if you have 3 or more employees, you have to have workers' compensation insurance. I would suggest it if you only have one part-time employee. Because if someone gets hurt on the job and you do not have workers' compensation, you may be looking at supporting that person and paying for all of their medical expenses for the rest of their lives. And because a lot of people can't afford to do that, they might just file bankruptcy or disappear and move away. That leaves the workers vulnerable to their own downfall if something was to happen to them. And it might not be due to negligence. It could be, an uninsured motorist hits a surveyor standing on the side of the road, or a tree falls on a surveyor out surveying in the woods, or, you might fall into an old foundation or an old abandoned well shaft. There are a lot of things that can happen. I've had employees get bit by copperhead snakes and have to be rushed to the hospital. And thankfully they survived and everything. But there are a lot of ways that even with good due diligence and common sense, people can still get hurt in the land surveying business. And so workers' compensation insurance is very important. Secondly, automobile insurance. A lot of people don't realize this, but there are 2 kinds of drivers and vehicles on the road. There are personal vehicles and drivers, and then there are commercial vehicles and drivers. I think it's a blurred line with Uber and Pizza Hut delivery, but for the most part, you're either a personal vehicle or you're a commercial vehicle. And if you're using your vehicle to survey out of as a sole practitioner, you're a commercial vehicle. And if you have an accident while you're out surveying in your personal vehicle, your personal insurance may say, you don't have the right insurance, we're not covering that. We insured you to drive your truck back and forth to work, and didn't realize that you were working out of your truck. That's a lot more mileage, that's a lot more exposure, that's a different level of liability that you're not insured for. So, you got to have a commercial insurance policy. Even if a solo operation, you need to make sure that your insurance covers you doing that business. But for the most part, my vehicles are in the company name. They are insured as commercial vehicles to be used and driven in commercial applications. Now, general liability insurance is pretty universal. You can get that on just about anything. You can get it on the operation of the company. You can get it for the premises where the surveying office is operated. And that can be as simple as, when somebody has a slip and fall accident, who pays? Do you want to be sued directly, or do you want to be insured so that there's an insurance company to pass somebody off to? You don't think about this, but besides surveying mistakes, which we'll cover last, and besides automobile coverage, and besides your workers' comp where your employees getting hurt, surveyors have some exposure to some liability just due to surveying. I once heard of a surveyor wearing an orange vest, standing on the side of the road, and he turned around and was trying to get the attention of his coworker and waved or made some kind of motion, caught the eye of a driver who crossed the center line. There was an accident. They sued the surveyor and won. That is something that general liability would pick up on. If you cut down somebody's tree for a line of sight, surveying with the total station, and they get all upset and say it's a big expensive tree, or that it's got sentimental values or whatever, they may sue you on your general liability policy. Would be something that would cover that. Simple contract negotiations. If you fail to perform, if somebody was counting on you to deliver a survey by a certain deadline and you missed the deadline and it cost them hundreds of thousands of dollars in loan fees or loss of opportunity, they will sue the surveyor if they've determined that he or she is at fault. that may or may not be something that general liability covers. Those are things that you negotiate with an insurance agent. These are things that your employer has to think about and take care of. And lastly, the one that deserves the most consideration, though, is professional liability insurance. We used to call it E&O for errors and omissions, and that's what it was known by, and some people still call it that. But this is insurance for when the surveyor makes a mistake and there's some damages. Typical example, let's just say that the surveyor said the line was in the wrong place. The client assumes the survey is correct, builds a retaining wall for a parking lot or a parking deck 2 feet over the property line, and then the error is discovered and the owner says, "Get your parking deck off my property." Yikes, somebody's going to be paying a big bill. The more common survey errors that I found are where people have just overlapped or slandered the title of adjacent property with faulty surveying, and damages have resulted. One in particular that we used as an example last semester, surveyor there was an old meets and bounds description that was hard to follow. It required some careful attention and talking to some neighbors. This other surveyor did not do that. They went out with a compass, did the best they could, tried to turn a buck. They were cheap. Then they overlapped my client by about 2.5 acres. This was like a 15 or 20 acre rural mountainous tract. But that also, the overlap included a couple of ponds and some frontage on a trout stream. So it wound up being about an $85,000 settlement that they just politely demanded that the surveyor pay. And that's strictly due to an error or an omission on the surveyor's part. That is something that professional liability insurance would cover, or at least come in to cover. Now, professional liability insurance can be expensive if a surveyor has no record, or if a surveyor has a bad record. But having a clean record for longer and longer helps with the rates. And there's just a lot to be said for knowing that if there's a huge mistake made out there, that you've got insurance. Even if you have to change the way you do business and have your policy canceled. I carry a $2 million policy. A $1 million policy is standard. Knowing that there's that much protection between you and your personal and family assets is very comforting. But there's another aspect of professional liability insurance that doesn't get talked about a lot. So let's say a sole proprietorship or a small company does not have professional liability insurance and a big mistake is made. Some folks will not pursue an uninsured surveyor because they're concerned that a jury will not want to divest a surveyor from his or her personal property or bank account. So that means that your clients may not be well suited, although some people will sue even an uninsured surveyor on the principle of the thing. I've had clients and known of lawsuits where they said, "I hope it bankrupts him. He messed me over. He created this problem. We're going after him. Don't care if he's insured or not." But the other final side of it is a lot of clients who are savvy and understand this will require professional liability insurance. It's ALTA Table A Item 19 that professional liability insurance be required as part of that ALTA engagement. Now, it's not required in most states. It's not required in Georgia. If I'm not mistaken, Florida requires a surveyor to have professional liability insurance. Alabama requires that you notify a client if you do not have professional liability insurance. So they don't require that you have it, but you by law have to notify the client before they engage you. In other words, your work order and your negotiation has to say, "I don't have professional liability insurance. Are you okay with that?" And some clients will say, "Well, why not?" And that puts you in an awkward position. Provides an advantage for surveyors who are insured. And typically surveyors who are insured are going to be the better surveyors, not always. And then typically they want to charge more, partly because of smart budgeting, which we will cover later in this lecture. Let's talk about just the business of surveying. There are basically 8 or 9 steps that apply to most any surveying operation. Now this is a boundary surveying workflow, but it pretty much would apply to the utility locate or almost anything else other than you might not have legal research, but this doesn't require a whole lot of discussion at this point, but it just requires some thinking that, you've got to have some organization and a plan. Somebody has to do all 9 of these steps, even if it's the sole practitioner doing all of them. The intake. Somebody has to order the survey. Somebody has to take the order. Somebody has to get them on the books, so to speak. I strongly recommend written work orders for every engagement, everything that you do. There are a multitude of reasons why. Probably a lot of YouTube videos or articles that you can find on this, but if you just take somebody's word or telephone call or email and go survey a piece of property, don't be surprised if problems follow, because the scope of service is not going to be well understood. A work order in writing puts that into play. That's exactly what we're agreeing to do. Who's responsible for paying? Gosh, early in my career, real estate agents would call and say, hey, we need a survey on lot 35. Can you do it in 2 weeks? We got a closing coming up. Yeah, sure can. Well, the closing fell through, and you say, hey, Mr. Realtor, nobody ever picked up my plat. Yeah, the deal fell through. Well, who's going to pay the bill? Well, I don't know. The buyer was going to, but he walked. You don't have an agreement with the buyer. You don't have a business contract. So you just eat that. That's what would happen. Also, you might have told them $1,000 to $1,200. They might have heard $500. They might disagree with you and say, I agreed to pay you $500. I don't know where you got your $1,000 to $1,200. Maybe they are honest and got you confused with another cheaper surveyor that they decided not to go with or couldn't get in touch with. Maybe they're trying to shyster you, but without a written work order, you are at all kinds of vulnerabilities. There are also things like a professional liability insurance carrier will tell you is to have a limitation of liability clause in there. There are venues, if there are disputes, there are all kinds of things that need to be in your written work order. But that's intake. That just gets it in and on the list. Then you research it, analyze it. Then you schedule the field work. That's a process that can take a lot of work to get it right, and not getting it right can cause a lot of issues. Trust me, I've been there and done that. You can have people showing up saying, where am I going today? And your day is wrecked trying to make a plan for the day on the fly. You can have clients who need to be there that you need to schedule with. And one problem, if you don't have a good scheduling method, is the lowest hanging fruit gets 8. The simple, easy job, all we got to do is go out there and locate a house. It's only been on the books for 2 days, but we'll go do that while somebody that's been on the books for 2 weeks continues to wait, because you have to do more research, you have to do more computations, you have to call and schedule it for whatever the reason. That keeps getting kicked down the road. That client gets unhappy. You've got bad business. So just schedule the field work. Next is the initial field work, which has been previously covered, then the processing of the data and the preliminary analysis to see what you found, return trips if and as needed to go set missing corners, subdivide the property, look for more evidence, look for more corners, and then you rinse and repeat E and F until your final analysis is in place. Then drafting, got to draw the survey, and as we know, and I'm going to stress this will be on your final exam. Surveyors are map makers. That's what we do. We produce maps. We produce plats, which are maps. They need to be legible. They need to be clear and concise. They need to meet all the state standards, but they need to fill the purpose that you're hired to prepare them for. So that's why CAD, engineering drafting with CAD, is a prerequisite to Survey 1. You're supposed to have those skill sets before Survey 1 ever starts the first day of class. That's why I have stressed CAD skills and production in the preparation of surveys in this class, because A, preparing surveys is part of the course description, but B, that's part of the basic skill set. It doesn't matter how good you are with a total station or a basin rover, or how good you are with a pin finder digging up old corners. If the plat looks like crap, or if it's not legible, or if it's hard to read and understand, then I'm sorry, but you have failed. And so you have to think about all that we do for the public, we do for the client and the other people in the process and in the world who will use our surveys. So, you know, good sound drafting skills is just an extension of good sound business communication. You are technically communicating the findings of the survey to the world. Once it's been drafted up, the surveyor should review it, make any tweaks, send it back or do it himself or herself, and then seal it, and then it's done. But then the process is not over because you have to deliver it. Now, most days we deliver with email. We used to deliver in person or by postal service or FedEx. But the work product has to get to the client. You have to invoice for it. You know, you said you paid $1,200. Here's the bill. You have to file away notes and sketches and things. And, you know, say we pull a plat off of the internet and we've got a nice clean copy, but then while we're out there, us or our crew, we make notes like bent, you know, rebar gone has been replaced with a pipe, or vice versa. Or you might just make a mental note that there's a fence down this line and it's straight and you got 2 fence corner shots. Things like that are field evidence and field notes that should be preserved. For years and years and decades, we preserved everything in a paper manila folder, and then we would file it away in a filing cabinet to be filed again. There's still nothing, or to be pulled up again and used again. Still nothing wrong with that, but we have gone to electronic records. We scan all of that when the job is done. That's our filing away, as we scan down the folder contents, and then the folder and all those notes go in the trash. But we have preserved them electronically. And in some survey engagements, you'll need to record the plat. Next, we're going to talk about professional etiquette. So, each state has a specific code of conduct of some kind. Some may even have more than one. Sometimes the professional society has a code of conduct or a code of ethics, which SAMSOG has one. It may be hard to find, but I know there is one. I've got a copy on my wall. And the State Board of Registration has adopted a rule of professional conduct that is codified into the state board rules. These will address things like conflicts of interest, how to conduct yourself, how to testify. Sometimes it's kind of generic, sometimes it's fairly detailed, but know that that's out there, and that's kind of a baseline. But let's talk about some things that you might not find so easily spelled out in the Code of Conduct. Like, oops, we made a mistake. That culvert is not at elevation 942, it's at 944. Oh my gosh, that's why you can't run water into it. It's 2 feet higher than we thought it was, and you're out there trying to build a shopping center to tie into that culvert. We made a mistake. Try to fix it as soon as you can. If you figure it out on your own, which has happened, for example, going back on a topo and laying out a storm line, only to realize that it doesn't hit. Maybe it was a blown rod height, maybe it was all kinds of rare but possible mistakes happen. You need to just pull the emergency brake and stop the train and say, hey, Mr. Client, Mr. Engineer, we found a mistake. Now, everybody makes mistakes. One thing that it was beaten into me early on, and that it deserves being imparted, is you only have to make a 70 on the exam to pass. But in the surveying world, you almost have to make 100 on every project. It's one reason why I grade kind of stiff is, you know, every mistake that a surveyor makes can bite him or her in the butt. A mistake like, oh, our plat says it's a 3/8 rebar, but it's really a 1/2 inch. Well, that probably doesn't rise to the level of any further action other than just correcting it in your file for future reference. Overlooking a building, or maybe the building you thought was square, but there's an addition on the back of the house. I saw this in the city of Atlanta in a title insurance claim, where survey showed a 4-sided house, but they'd added on a 10 by 12 deck on the back of the house that the surveyor somehow managed to miss. Now, he claims it was built after the survey, but aerial photography proves otherwise. And it's over the property line by like 6 feet. That's a problem. If the surveyor had maybe surveyed the property next door and discovered his own mistake, then he could have said, hey, I made a mistake. Here's the property line. I didn't show that deck, but the property line's in the right place. There's thousands of ways that these mistakes can be found. I have found mistakes that I have made that have gone out the door. Thankfully, none of them have been catastrophic. But I am not perfect, and I've not scored 100 on every plat that I have put out in my career either. And people understand that. As my dad used to say, making a mistake is not the problem. It's how you handle it that makes your character. So if you own up to it and try to help fix it, that goes a long way. I know of a large surveying and engineering company in the north side of Atlanta that had millions of dollars worth of business with a client that when they first started out on their very first project, they missed an invert on a sewer manhole. And it caused them to have to tear out a few hundred feet of sewer line and tear out some manholes and raise them and replace them. And the surveyor stepped in and said, "Hey, I'll pay for it. It's my mistake." And the contractor was merciful and helped him, not charge too much. But there was no parking lot, no asphalt, no water lines in place. It was just raw dirt, and they realized when they got to the end that there was a problem. An invert was blown. And so, it cost that surveyor, I was told, around $50,000 back in the 90s to fix this. But that client respected that the surveyor owned up to it and made it right. And they did millions of dollars worth of business later on. So, there's that aspect. The other thing is if you bow up and ignore it and hope it goes away, it normally only grows like a fire in California and gets worse and worse. And if they figure it out and you own up to it later, and there's a parking lot and curb and gutter, and they're about to open their business, and then it has to be fixed, and then it costs a lot more money to fix, and you might have a lot of opportunity costs. The other side of the coin is when I think we found another surveyor's mistake. We all make mistakes. Nobody's better at finding surveyor mistakes than other surveyors. Doesn't mean we need to go looking for them or go, ha ha ha, we're right, you're wrong, you blew it, you missed a pin. But when you find a mistake that's going to impact your survey, especially if another surveyor has overlapped or gored you, you owe it to them and you owe it to yourself to make a call and say, hey, is this right? I give a scenario in the handout about you find a new shiny rebar 2 feet from an axle that's flush. And, come to find out, and let's say maybe the surveyor did the survey in the snow and the axle was not visible. It was under 4 inches of snow, didn't find it. Pin finder's batteries were gone, or pin finder was acting up. So they went back, they computed where they thought it ought to be off a 1958 survey that's to the nearest foot that had 6 feet of bust in it. And they set a pin in the best place that they could, lacking the original monument. But they set it 2 feet from the axle. Now the snow's gone, it's in the summertime, you find the axle, the clients want to know what's this rebar doing 2 feet over on my property, that axle's always been my corner. Well, you need to call the surveyor and say, yeah, I found a problem. You don't need to be accusational. You don't need to demand that he fix his plat. There was a surveyor who was a very good surveyor, but he rubbed in Cobb County back in the 70s, but he rubbed a lot of people the wrong way because he would call up and say, I found a mistake, you need to change your plat. Well, just changing a plat is just the beginning of a fix-it. You might have corrective deeds. You might have to help somebody refile and re-qualify for a mortgage if there's a mortgage that insures part of this property. So that doesn't go over too well. But just state the facts and say, hey, I found this axle 2 feet from this rebar that you set, and I wondered, am I missing something? Is there something out there? Maybe I'm overlooking, because I'm really thinking the axle's it. It fits better. My client says the axle's his corner, and he wants to know why you set a pin 2 feet away over on his side of the property. He's about to build a fence. You owe that surveyor the opportunity to hear it from you, not to get a demand letter from an attorney or for a client or a property owner to go into his office raising Cain. It always gets twisted around. Oh, Mark Chastain said you were wrong. Well, take the narrative away from the neighbor or from your client and talk to the other surveyor yourself, and then you avoid all those miscommunications and innuendos. On the flip side, go back to that scenario. I've saw this on a few occasions. I'm pretty sure I'm right. I'm pretty sure the other guy's wrong. And then he lays something on me that flips the cards. And wow, that axle, I saw a similar situation where there was a plat filed showing an open top pipe and an axle 2 feet away. Apparently the axle had just been somebody's guess at where they think it was for the purpose of clearing land. They talked to all the neighbors. Nobody assumed that the axle was anything. When it was intended to be actually surveyed, the surveyor came out, surveyed it, set a pipe. The adjacent owner said, "Oh, well, I set that. I wasn't sure about it. I think I'm pretty good to get it within 2 feet. Yay." Okay, the axle in that situation had no bearing. The open top pipe got tore out, removed. Something happened to it. Surveyor B figured that out and put a rebar back in the correct spot where the open top used to be. Now, cards are completely turned. Wow, I better not hold that axle and show an overlap and create a legal issue. I better go with that. Better go with that rebar because it's in the right place and I can back it up. All goes back to that most defensible solution approach. In a situation like that, you cannot really defend your axle without talking to the other surveyor, or at least doing the best job that you can to figure out why he or she made that decision. So it's a real fork in the road. You really have to consider what you're doing. You don't want to make enemies. You don't want to hang yourself out on a limb. You don't want to go up on a hill that you don't want to die on. You want to really make sure that you cover it well. If it does go to court, and there is a dispute over this 2 feet, and it's a flip of the coin, and you've just been in your own ego and your own turtle shell and decided, hey, I don't need to talk to Surveyor B. I'm a surveyor. I know what I'm doing. By gosh, there's the corner. If there's any question later and you did not follow these standard etiquette steps of common professional courtesy and talk to the other surveyor, you're going to be holding a losing hand possibly. You're at least not going to be viewed in the best light. A couple other topics. Brings us to the last two topics, budgeting and pricing. So you get a whole bachelor degree in business management or business finance, so we're not going to go into all that. You will need to know that loan amortization is actually covered on the FS and PS exams because it's an important part of business management budgeting aspect. So all I'll say is, in my experience, in my opinion, you must have some sort of a budget and a plan. In other words, you can't just run wild for a long time just hoping to charge enough to cover the bills. You got to be a little bit more methodical than that. You need to maintain the vehicles and your equipment, including software and computers. In my opinion, there's just no way around that. Doesn't mean that you have to stay on the bleeding edge of technology or have the most current thing. If it's working, it's very logical to go with it. But don't let it get so far out of date that when it quits working that you have a huge learning curve going from version 5 to version 11. You're going to be losing a lot of productivity and leaving a lot of tools on the table that you're not familiar with. Need to have a plan to replace vehicles and equipment. Most equipment is out of date or obsolete in 3 to 5 years. So plan to replace equipment when it becomes 3 to 5 years old. Same with trucks. My rule is 6 years old or 125,000 miles, it gets traded. Don't keep it long enough to really be in the tank on value or to start giving you a lot of problems. So you just kind of have to have a little bit of a budget in mind to know that, okay, I'm not charging enough to do that, you need to charge more. But then I would also say charge as much as the market will bear. Right now is a very opportunistic time. I saw dark times when surveyors could not get work and were desperate and cut their fees, and that's bad. That's not a good place to be. But if we can, it's best to roll money back into the company every year, whether if it's your surveying company or what you're being paid to manage the surveying department, or if you want to look at what your companies should be doing if you're having to wait on the side of the road and not get work done because you're waiting on a tow truck, and then the truck's in the shop for a few days because it's 13 years old and got 400,000 miles on it. Well, some of this may begin to click with you. I have been there. I have done that. Which kind of takes us to the next final topic of pricing. So there is no good hard rule for how much surveys should cost. There's a lot of discussion over that. There are a lot of, pretty much it's sort of arbitrary. It's what I'll agree to do it for. If I agree to do it for X, then that's how much I'm going to charge. If the market will bear 1.2X, then that's what I'm going to charge. And it's not greed. It's got a lot of back value benefits. Whether if you're surveying, as a sole practitioner, or if you're a traditional surveying company, or if you're in a larger organization, funds are good. You need to have funds to pay to pay employees, to compensate them, keep them happy, keep them around, provide a return on the investment for the training and the unproductive time that employees have early on. You need to have funds to keep your equipment in good working order. And if you suffer from profit guilt syndrome, like a lot of surveyors apparently do, donate money to charity. Be a philanthropist. Donate to the scholarship fund, or to your church, or to a charity. There is really no good reason to not charge all that the market will bear, and that keeps the profession healthy. We're plagued right now with a situation where we're losing in Georgia around I'm told somewhere around 125 to 150 surveyors every year, and we're only putting back about 35 to 50-ish. So we're losing a net 100 or so every year at the current pace, which can't go on much longer, because I heard in a recent Senate hearing that there are only 770 actively licensed surveyors in Georgia. So, we've got to do what we can to keep the profession alive, to serve the public. The public, it's not just greed on our part, but the public is grossly underserved if they can't find competent, qualified surveyors. All these bad problems creep up and exist due to that. So, charge as much as possible. People hear, wow, he's charging that much, I should charge that much too. It's good for the profession. It's not price fixing. It's not unethical. Charge as much as the market will bear. Keep this in mind. There's an old adage that you can have any two of the following three attributes when you buy something: cheap, good, and fast. Just think about that. If it's cheap and good, it's not going to be fast. Somebody's going to be taking their time. Somebody's not in a big hurry. Somebody doesn't have a big overhead. Maybe in the surveying world, a solo practitioner. It might be cheap and it might be good, but it's not going to be fast. Cheap and fast, it's never going to be good. You do it in a hurry and they're not charging enough to cover their bases and do it right, well, you've got problems. I think everybody can realize that. Good and fast, that's a product that I like to offer to clients. Not necessarily, I like to be fast. People appreciate it when you pull them out of a jam, or when you can meet deadlines. That's a good staying quality that can command a price. Because if you do a good job and you can get it done fast, you are the opposite spectrum of cheap. So if you want it good and fast, cheap is the attribute that I choose not to offer. Fast is optional, but good is not optional. Always has to be good. In closing, respect the profession, respect the generations before you and after you, respect what land surveying does for society, for the business world. Do not undersell yourself, either to employers or to clients, and go out there and make a difference.